Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Shadow Stories. Are you tired of fairy tales? Done with happily ever afters? Then leave the light on and get ready, because tonight we're venturing into the darkness of Alaska. Forget the postcards of majestic mountains and glimmering glaciers. We'll be visiting the places they don't talk about. The cursed towns, the haunted mines, the forgotten highways. These are not stories of brave heroes, but of ordinary people who crossed a line they shouldn't have and paid a price they never expected. So let's begin. Story 1. The frozen air of Portlock, Alaska was not just cold. It was heavy, as if saturated with a congealed silence that smothered every sound, every rustle. In those days, when the town still lived and its cannery roared and smelled of salted fish, few paid attention to that quiet. But with the arrival of spring in 1949, the silence was replaced by something far more ominous. Old Corwin, a veteran who sat by his window with a hot cup of tea watching the forest that crept right up to the cannery's back lot, was the first to notice it. He claimed to have seen something enormous towering over the trees. It was neither bear nor moose. The creature, twice a man's height, was covered in dark, matted fur, and its eyes, two yellow smoldering coals, stared into the town. It didn't move. It simply watched. Corwin shouted to draw attention, and the thing vanished as quickly as if it had never been, leaving only a crawling unease behind. "It was measuring something," Corwin whispered, his words hanging in the air like a curse. True fear took hold of Portlock when Declan disappeared. Declan was the best hunter in the area. He knew the forest like the back of his hand. His wife, Lily, heard a single blood-curdling scream that echoed over the mountains and seemed to last forever. The search party found only his rifle, snapped in two as if twisted like paper. No body, no trace beyond torn earth and shreds of fabric. 2 weeks later, 3 more people vanished. Each time there were signs of a struggle, but never bodies. Something was taking people and carrying them away for good. Something that left tracks. Hemlock the blacksmith, a strong and level-headed man, measured them and turned pale. The prints were enormous, 18 inches long, 5 toes and claws. It weighed at least 600 pounds and walked upright like a man. But no man has feet like that, and no bear leaves tracks like these, Hemlock muttered, genuine horror in his voice. The elders named it Nainok, from the old Aleut language, the hairy one who steals people. The tracks were everywhere. One morning after a night when his house was bombarded with huge stones, Elias Hendrickson found them laid out in a perfect circle. In the center, like a sinister altar, lay the belongings of the missing. Declan's hunting knife, Sarah Nilsson's silk hair ribbon, Frank Peterson's tobacco pouch. It was a message. Something was collecting trophies to let us know it was watching. With each passing day, it grew bolder, studying us, our habits, our fears. Albrecht, an old Russian who had lived in Portlock since 1921, decided to fight back. When the creature came for his dogs, he went out with a rifle and an axe. At midnight, gunshots shook the town. Then came Albrecht's scream, and after that, grave silence. In the morning, they found him. His chest was crushed, but he was still alive, long enough to rasp what he had seen. Not a beast, not a man. Something in between rough, dark fur. A face too long, too primitive, with wolfish teeth. It was incredibly fast and shrewd. It had used his dogs as bait, knowing the old hunter would come to protect them. Albrecht's death was the last straw. The 23 adults and a few children who remained gathered and voted unanimously to flee. They would all leave on the next supply ship, due in 2 weeks. They weren't running out of panic. They ran because they knew this thing would not stop until no one remained. It picked them off one by one, growing more confident and aggressive with each attack. If they stayed, they would join the list of those who had simply vanished into the Alaskan wild. But the creature knew. It understood their decision. Old Dalton, peering out her window, saw it standing in the middle of the main street, turning its head as if counting the houses. When the moon slipped behind clouds, it disappeared. At dawn, the town froze. In front of every house drawn on the frozen ground was the same symbol, a circle with rays emanating from it resembling the sun. The elders said it was an ancient Alat sign meaning watching or waiting, a promise. It would not forget. It would wait. The last entries in Caleb's diary were made aboard the supply ship carrying away the last residents. He looked back at Portlock and thought the forest was already pressing in on the houses. He imagined he saw something enormous moving among the trees near the old Russian church. Captain Mort promised to return in 6 months, but Caleb told him not to bother. Some places were better left alone, but Captain Mort did return. 6 months later, his ship came back to the harbor and he was pale as a sheet. He refused to speak of what he'd seen until whiskey loosened his tongue. The town, he said, had been destroyed, not by time or weather, but by something monstrously strong. Roofs torn off and hurled hundreds of yards, walls punched through as by giant fists. Even tons of cannery equipment overturned like children's toys. Worst of all was what lay in the middle of the street. From shattered timbers and debris, the creature had built a jagged, mind-warping structure that hurt to look at. At its center lay a pile of bones, human bones, arranged in that same circular pattern. Captain Mort counted a dozen skulls. He believed the missing had been kept alive, and when the townsfolk left, slaughtered all at once to raise that gruesome monument. He felt watched the whole time, but never saw by whom. He knew that if he lingered, he'd be added to the collection. I closed the diary, a chill racing through me. The entries were too detailed to dismiss as fiction. What if the authorities simply refused to admit that something in Alaska could drive out an entire town? What if it was easier to blame economics? I found notes about the survivors. Many died under strange circumstances. Some vanished. Others were found mauled in places where bears had never been aggressive. Caleb himself died in 1957. The death certificate said heart attack, but his nephew claimed there were marks on the body as if struck with immense force. Before his death, Caleb said something was watching him from the forest's edge. I don't know if this story is true, but holding this old diary, I can't shake the sense that Caleb documented something real. Something that still waits in the ruins of Portlock. Something that learned to hunt people 75 years ago and perhaps still watches, still waits, still remembers the taste of fear from a town that is no more. Most of all, one question haunts me. Did the creature truly leave Portlock? Or is it still there, building its grotesque monuments from the bones of anyone foolish enough to trespass? Story 2. I wasn't obsessed, just curious. As a blogger, I chased stories, and the one about Sayre, Alaska, was too tempting to pass up. Rumors of mysterious disappearances in abandoned mines were an old, worn-out record, but when they kept playing, even the most cynical journalists listened. I took my faithful husky Shadow and set off. Sayre isn't a town so much as a ghost. Rusted rails ran to nowhere, wooden buildings rotted under eternal snow, and the wind, like a living thing, howled through empty windows. The cold was so fierce that every breath burned my lungs. In the hush broken only by the creak of old timbers, I could hear my own heartbeat. Tracks were everywhere, mine, shadows, and then something else. Fresh, heavy boot prints leading straight to a mine tunnel that should have been locked and abandoned decades ago. Shadow whimpered. Maybe it was a premonition, maybe just the cold. But then I heard something else. A faint rhythmic thud deep below. Not wind. Hammer blows. I swung my flashlight, its beam carving the dark, throwing up gaunt silhouettes on the walls, emaciated human shapes poised to leap. Inside the mine, the knife-cold air gave way to a sticky, grave-wet damp. The thudding grew louder. Tools lay scattered on the floor, rusted but not deserted. Not a museum. Work. Questions spun. Who were they? Why work here in a dead town when there were safer shafts for miles? And where did the thrill-seekers go, the ones who, they said, disappeared? Deeper in, the thud was joined by a strange, creaking rasp. My light picked out what I first took for a strip of cloth and then realized it wasn't cloth at all. Yellowed strips of desiccated skin hung from a beam like filthy pennants. Nausea rose. Curiosity won. I shifted. Shadow flinched, making a sound I'd never heard from him. Something between a growl and a death rattle. Then I saw it. It slid from around the bend rather than walked. A man in torn clothes and a miner's helmet. But his skin was gray with dust, and his eyes empty and glassy like a doll's eyes. His body was unnaturally thin, his legs dragging behind him. This was no living man. A miner, animated, hollow. More followed, dozens. All of them moving without a sound, like shadows, their dead eyes fixed on me. I couldn't move. Shadow crushed himself against my shins, too afraid to bark. Details made my stomach turn. One missing half a face, teeth grinning naked. Another missing a finger, yet still clenching a pick. They weren't dead. They were something worse. I had no doubt. These were the missing. They hadn't vanished. They'd been assimilated. Their eyes were empty, but they saw me. One lifted his pick. A cold not born of air crawled over me, the cold of terror. I dropped the flashlight and ran, clawing my way through blackness. My lungs burned. Behind me, something scraped over stone as if the dead were dragging their tools, still laboring. I burst into the open and ran until I fell in the snow. Shadow panted beside me. We were alive. When I looked back, one of them stood at the mouth of the tunnel, eyes locked on mine. He didn't follow, he just waited. I told no one. What would I say? Zombies work the Sayer mines. They'd call me mad. I went home, but the nightmare stayed. I stopped sleeping, always sure I could hear the faint thud. Every time I look out the window, I think something stands among the trees, biding its time, hunting me the way I hunted it. Maybe they're waiting for the ice to break. Maybe they're preparing the mine for something else, or maybe they just want to swell their ranks. I only know this. Sayer is no abandoned town. It is a cemetery where corpses still labor and the dead toil toward some purpose yet unrevealed. And there's one more thing. Every time I close my eyes, I see those empty eyes, and I swear I hear a low, rasping whisper. Welcome home, Kai. We've been waiting so long. Story 3. Arthur Graves, an auditor at Adamant Corporation, was a man of numbers. No emotion, only dry logic. They sent him to Kakot, Alaska, a dead town wrapped around a dead mine, to sift old ledgers and close cases dating back to 1882. The town greeted him with suffocating quiet, as if life itself had frozen solid. The air felt hard. The wind moaned through rusted frames like something in pain. In the old manager's office, a wooden shack with windows like dead eyes, Arthur spread the papers. It was plain enough. In 1882, a cave-in had killed an entire shift. Officially, the mine was shuttered as unprofitable. The bodies were never recovered. But in the manager's final entries, written in a crooked, trembling hand, Arthur found the line. Work continues. Output hasn't dropped. They haven't stopped nonsense, he thought, yet the numbers said otherwise. If work had ceased, how did tons of ore keep shipping out for months after the disaster? Why did the production plan keep being overfilled? On a dusty wall map, he found a tunnel marked as collapsed, but in truth it led back to the main shaft. He went to see. The mine was abandoned, yet as he climbed down the creaking ladder, he felt he wasn't alone. His flashlight caught it and his heart missed a beat. a fresh, heavy boot print in the dust. Another, and another, leading deeper where there should have been only dark. He went on. After a while, the sound reached him, a rhythmic metallic clack, and then another. The thud of hammers on ore, the scrape of picks. Everything he'd been told was a lie. Something was still working down here, but why? In the main shaft, his beam washed over a nightmare. People, dozens of miners, gray with dust, moving, working. No speech, only a low, echoing rumble from their chests, closer to a groan than a voice. Their eyes were empty and glassy, chips of ice. Their bodies were dried and unnatural, as if their insides had long since turned to dust and only bluish sinews remained. Their rags hung from them. On a sheepskin coat he saw the date, 1882. These were the dead men from the collapse. Only they hadn't died, not properly. Frozen in permafrost and then compelled back to labor. They moved with the precision of machines, tireless, raising and dropping their tools, faces fixed like death masks. All the while, the ore kept coming. A realization made him sick. The corporation knew. It knew the bodies had been preserved, and somehow it had found a way to put them back to work. Not for profit alone, but for something else. The ore itself was strange. Under light it glowed with a faint bluish luminescence. A new noise, wheels creaking. One of the dead was pushing a cart. Arthur raised his light to guide it and wished he hadn't. The miner's empty eyes swung to him, a torn, rasping sound breaking from its chest. It cocked a hand, beckoning. Others began to move, not fast, inexorable. Arthur ran, logic splintering, against horror. If they caught him, he wouldn't die. He'd be taken down and added to the work, folded into the endless task. He reached the surface with his lungs on fire, fled until he fell in the snow. He'd escaped, but nothing would ever be the same. Adamant Corporation hadn't merely hidden the deaths. It had turned the dead into slave labor, making profit out of the grave. Now he, Arthur Graves, was the only living witness. A man carrying a secret he could never tell, because to tell it would be to go back and let them finish the job. At night, he sometimes hears a dull, far-off thumping, someone still working deep below. Kakot's living dead, reminding him that some horrors don't kill you, they turn you into a machine. Story 4. Treadwell, Alaska isn't just an abandoned town. It's a graveyard where the wind croons to rusted machines and ruined houses. I, Silas, didn't come back to reminisce. I came to face what I'd hoped had long since rotted under the rubble. The official story says the Treadwell mine flooded in 1917. Then a section collapsed, taking lives. A convenient legend, woven from water and dust, to hide the truth. Back then, I was a boy. We little miners, as they called us, were expendable to the Treadwell Gold Mining Company. Small, slight, able to squeeze into narrow, unstable tunnels where grown men couldn't go. We were promised food, a roof, a pinch of gold. We were used like living pickaxes. The earth sang and groaned every day, and none of us imagined it could swallow us forever. The day it happened, I was away on an errand. That saved my life. What I heard wasn't a collapse, it was explosions. Several deafening blasts that dropped the mountain and sealed the shafts. When I got back, the galleries where my friends had been working an hour before were walled with rock. The old overseer, Dietrich, rushed us out and told us to forget what we'd seen. Years later, I returned. Now Treadwell is a ghost. Rust eats the iron and the forest takes the rest. But places remember. I slipped into the mine, skirting blockages. The air was damp and cold with a faint sweet rot. Gooseflesh prickled my arms. A whisper threaded the dark, as if someone were choking on words. The whisper was everywhere. I found a hidden passage I remembered from childhood. cleverly masked. Beyond it, a tunnel the bosses had claimed held no ore. But there were tracks here, small prints of children's boots leading deeper toward a dim, sickly light. Then I saw it, a chamber full of tools, small shovels, tiny picks built for children's hands. In the center, a chunk of rock veined with gold shouldered up from the floor. And on that gold lay them, several little bodies desiccated and still, fixed in the poses death had found them. Parchment skin, empty sockets, preserved by the chill and damp. They hadn't been buried by accident. They'd been buried on purpose. The whispers rose, not ghosts, pain stamped into the very air. The voices threaded names, mine, then my friends. They knew, hissed one. They lied, rasped another, each word like a tear in cloth. Not natural, malice. Small, innocent souls betrayed and killed for gold. Suddenly the whisper became a scream, not pain but terror, howling a name I hadn't heard in decades. Dietrich. I turned, my beam catching a human figure, not a spirit. A tall, gray-haired old man. Dietrich, who'd supposedly died years ago. It was him, eyes empty and cold as a corpse's, a ledger clutched tight. His record of deeds. He didn't just visit, he lived here. Guardian of his secret vault, his eternal curse. I understood. Dietrich and the company hadn't only killed those children. They had done something that bound them to this place. The little miners filled the tunnel with their demand. Justice. I hadn't wandered here by chance, I was part of their plan. I don't know what became of Dietrich. I know only this. He didn't simply die. He became part of the place, part of the nightmare. At night, when I shut my eyes, I hear the whispers, the little miners still asking to be heard. They won't rest until they get what they are owed. Sometimes I wonder what they want. My soul, or just the truth told aloud. But truth has a price, and I'm afraid to pay it. Story 5. In Denali Park, Alaska, there are places no human has trod. Locke fancied I knew them best. I'm a biologist, not a superstitious old man, and I came with my team, the cynical Elwood and the bright-eyed Lydia, to study rare Arctic foxes. We pushed past the end of the trails into a wildness no instrument can measure. The air was so pure and cold it felt like it could shatter your lungs. A deathly hush lay over us as if we'd been buried beneath glassy ice. It began with a carcass, not merely eaten but picked to the bone, clean, perfectly eviscerated, not a sinew left. Wolves and bears don't do that. A butcher surgeon's work, only crueler. Something's wrong, Elwood whispered, uncharacteristically grave. Lydia pointed to an odd impression in the snow, neither bear nor moose. A long, thin print like a human hand with unnaturally long fingers. On the second day, the voices came. At first a hush, riding the wind. They called us by name, said things only the closest could know. Locke, help, floated through the air, my sister's voice, and we hadn't spoken in years. Lydia flinched, saying her mother was calling her home. Elwood went pale and gripped his rifle. It's it, he rasped. It's here. Simon, our guide, stayed quiet until we reached Winter Gorge, a cursed place known only to locals. He told us about the Wendigo, an ancient spirit of hunger once human that lures hunters and drives them to eat their own until their bodies waste and their hearts turn to ice. It calls you by name, he said. The more you fear, the stronger it grows. We camped, but no one slept. The cold slid through our layers and the fire couldn't shake it. This wasn't weather but malice, a sweet, sick smell of decay riding the air. I stepped out to check the perimeter and saw them, a suite of tracks leading straight to our tents. Fresh, and yet they looked ages old. By morning, Lydia was gone. Only her backpack and a torn scrap of jacket remained. Elwood, wild-eyed, swore something had dragged her into the dark. We followed the prints. A few hundred meters on, we found it, a tall, desiccated thing like a walking skeleton sheathed in skin. Sparse tufts of fur clung to it. On its brow rose great branching antlers like a crown. Its eyes were live embers in empty sockets. Its humanish face wore a ravaged, hungry grin. It was eating, and it was watching us. Its mouth was slick with blood, and clutched in a hand like a bird's claw was something that had been Lydia's hand. I screamed, and Elwood fired. The bullet went through it like smoke. It didn't flinch, only turned its head, and a sound poured from it that froze my blood. Not a scream, a laugh. Hollow, dry, in Elwood's own voice. I ran. I don't know how I lived. I left Elwood and Simon behind as the thing paced me, mimicking their voices, pleading for help. I staggered out alone, frostburned and shaken. I tried to forget. I can't. And at night the whispers return and the piercing cold climbs my bones. This isn't just a creature, it's a curse that follows, and its strength is your fear. It won't stop. It's hungry. It will always be hungry. One day I'll answer when it calls. Story 6. Fishing isn't a profession, it's a curse that runs in the blood. I, Captain Doug, know it better than anyone. My grandfather, my father, and I all stood at the helm. All of us grew up on stories of the sea that takes its due. I was 11 when I first heard of the Indomitable, a fishing vessel lost in the Bering Sea, taking my great-grandfather and his crew into the icy black. They said she sank, but no wreckage was ever found. No bodies. The tale followed our family like a shadow from the sea. We were working off Alaska near a place locals call the Whale Graveyard. No boats come there except ours. But that night, through a wool-thick fog, a silhouette rose. A fishing trawler, old, rust-streaked, uncannily like the Indomitable from my grandfather's photos. My crew, two tough hands, Eric and Flynn, saw it too. Fear tightened their eyes. "Captain, it's not moving," Eric whispered. He was right. No movement, no lights, no signal. It just stood like a ghost. I hailed it on the radio. Dead air. As we crept closer, something shifted on the deck. Shadows, hunched in human figures. Through binoculars, I saw them move with unnatural grace, jerky, puppet-like, staring straight at us. Close enough now to see faces pale as flour, eyes entirely black, wet, glossy skin. Clothes oddly free of rust or mold. They were fresh. Their gear belonged to another century. The Indomitable wasn't only a ghost ship, it was a coffin ship. Something scratched along her wooden flank, desperate nails trying to break through. Eric and Flynn muttered about sea ghosts. I wanted to say fatigue was tricking us, but their fear smothered my lie. This wasn't a hallucination, it was alive. Just not in any way a thing should be. Then they started to move. Slow at first, then with purpose. They swarmed the deck, and the smiles they wore froze my blood. I ordered us about and made for open water. We turned, but the ship followed, not sailing, drifting as if the sea itself carried her. The crew smiled and waved, welcoming us. Something wanted us close, to join, or to take the curse from them. I drove my men hard, and we ran the engines all night until safe harbor rose out of the mist. Years have passed. I still hear knocks at my door and the creak of wood in the dark. I know the Indomitable follows like a faithful dog. I can't go to sea, I can't close my eyes. When I do, I see their faces, those empty eyes, those carrion smiles, and I hear the whisper, "Join us." We are still working. One day, I fear I will. The sea always takes its due. Story 7. The Dalton Highway isn't just a road, it's a living thing with rules of its own. It whispers when you drive alone, it angers when you break them, and it takes what it's owed. I, Garrett, knew that. I'd spent 30 years on Alaska's icy artery. The worst thing I ever saw wasn't wolf or bear, it was a man. That night, the blizzard was so vicious the air felt solid. Snow flew sideways, my headlights cut a narrow corridor through hostile white. No hitchhikers ever show on that road, not in weather like that. So when I saw him, I doubted my senses. He stood at the shoulder, still as a post. Tall, thin, wrapped in an old, tattered coat that seemed to drink the light. No pack, nothing, just watching me. I should have kept going. But there's a fatal pity in every ice road driver. I stopped. The cab door opened with a moan. He climbed in without a word. The cold that came with him wasn't ordinary, it was grave cold that ached in my jaw. He sat ramrod straight, face white as chalk. No breath steamed from him. I tried small talk. He stared out the window. I asked where to. He shrugged. Wherever the road leads, he rasped, voice dry as dead leaves. The cab changed with him inside. My radio, usually a hiss of static, dropped to a low animal howl. I felt watched, not by the man, but by something else. Something outside that had somehow slipped in. His shadow crawled over my dash, too long, warped wrong. The thud came sudden and heavy, like we'd hit something. The rig shuddered. I saw nothing until I glanced back. An enormous, twisted silhouette of a moose lay behind the cab, antlers corkscrewed the wrong way, legs broken. Blood pooled dark as ink, black instead of red. Food, my passenger whispered, eyes fixed on the carcass. A cold rolled off him, not frost, but hunger. I braked hard and spilled into the storm, yelling at him to get out. He stepped down. I caught one last look at his face and wish I hadn't. A smile opened, too wide, predatory. Teeth long and pointed like a wolf's, eyes burning with cold yellow fire. He turned and pointed into my truck bed, then I understood. A body, mangled like the moose, bite marks, boot prints in the snow, his prints. He wasn't a hitchhiker. He was the thing that does this. I climbed back in and drove, didn't look back. I don't know what he was. Ghost, thing born of the cold. Maybe he needs a ride to hunt. I never returned to the Dalton. Sometimes in the rear view, I think I see him again. Silent on the roadside, waiting for the next driver fool enough to stop, waiting for his next companion on a road you don't come back from. Story 8. In the Arctic on an oil rig, there's nothing but cold and darkness. That's not a metaphor. The sun stays down for months. You live by light that doesn't reach the dark. We were drilling into permafrost. My name is Marek, and I was there when the ice rebelled. At first, it was only a sound, a dull, low hum seeping up from below. It shook the air and set our bones to buzzing. Old Hans, our boss, waved it off. The earth singing, he said, happens when you drill permafrost. But the hum grew louder, became a moan, and then a bone-deep, inhuman howl. Everyone felt it, drillers and engineers alike. We all knew this wasn't just noise. It was a voice from the deep. I got scared when even Hans went nervous. He'd been here longest. He said he'd never heard such a thing. His eyes were wide. He knows, he whispered. He knows we're here. He didn't say who he was. He didn't have to. The ground around the rig began to split. Cracks widened into gaping wounds. Steam sighed out of them with a sweet, rotting stench like meat gone bad. I peered into one fissure and saw a black, oily liquid oozing up like blood from a wound. Something moved in it. Then it came out. It climbed from the crack, from the black seep itself. Human-shaped but wrong, skin gray, body long and stretched thin as if pulled from the earth like taffy. Arms too long, clawed fingers, eyes empty and black. It stood there and stared and let out that howl, not evil, hungry. It woke, Hans breathed. It wants us to put it back. We couldn't fight it, we couldn't flee, ice and night hemmed us in. We tried bullets. They slipped through like through vapor. A ghost you could still feel, a ghost that could still kill. It touched one of the new guys, barely a week on the job. The kid screamed. His body began to rot, skin sloughed off in wet sheets. He turned into something that should not live. There were 3 of us left, Hans, an engineer, and me. We bolted our quarters and waited for our turn. Hans told me what he knew. Once it was human. It had been buried in the permafrost. It should have stayed there. We woke it. Now it wanted to take us with it, to make us part of it. I'm writing this knowing no one may read it. Hans and the engineer are gone. I heard screams, then nothing. I'm alone. It walks the deck and it knows I'm here. It wants me last. Sometimes I think we didn't wake it at all. It was waiting for us to come dig it free. We're not drilling oil anymore, we're drilling death, and I know it's the end. The frost is in my bones, something else is in my veins, something that waited below. Story 9. In Alaska, there are places where even the air is heavy and the light brings no warmth. I'm Griffin, a bush pilot. I've flown over such places 100 times, tourists, researchers, hunters in tow. I never believed in cursed valleys and old spirits. Then one flight changed everything. My passengers were a family, Elias, his wife Rebecca, and their 10-year-old son Jeremy. They wanted to see the Valley of Oblivion, remote, eerie, the subject of strange talk. They said the valley was cursed by ancient spirits and that it took those who dared to come. I laughed. I knew these skies like my own hands. Those stories were campfire smoke. We climbed into a cold, clear morning. As the valley neared, I sensed it, something moving where only air should move. Then on a signal no one gave, a thick, impenetrable fog fell on us. Instruments died. The engine droned strangely. We were flying, but not moving. We were caught. I thought it was a glitch, until Rebecca screamed. I looked back and saw Elias aging in seconds, skin pleating, hands withering, hair ashing to gray. Then Jeremy, round cheeks drawing long eyes dimming, hair darkening as if night fell on him alone. I understood. They were aging. I wasn't. I checked the mirror. No change. I was myself. Impossible. I tried to put her down, but the ground below looped itself. Trees, rocks, a braid of river repeating like a broken reel. We were in a loop, and I was trapped in it as the only witness who wouldn't age. I watched Rebecca's hair go silver, her face map over with lines. She didn't scream. She cried. Then she whispered, fears, regrets, children waiting at home, and the whisper held a terror I couldn't bear. I watched Jeremy wither into an old man, his voice rasped, his hands shook. I couldn't look, it was too much. After days that felt like years, Elias died, like something had drained him dry. Then Rebecca, a breath that didn't return. I was alone with 2 empty bodies. Through the fog, a silhouette appeared. Human-like, too tall, too thin. It moved in a way that said it was waiting for me to come to it. I was cursed, not just an observer, complicit. I brought them here, I remained. When the fog finally lifted, I sat down. The ground was bare, no sign of anything, no tracks, no proofs. Just me. And I knew I was finished. I'd never fly again. If I did, I'd see their faces, and I'd become what they became. I live alone now in a small cabin. I never fly. I can't. At night I hear them, Elias, Rebecca, Jeremy, whispering my name. They're waiting. I'm afraid I'll go to them soon. Story 10. I wasn't a scientist, just the caretaker at a remote research station in the middle of Alaska. Keep the gear running, keep the lights on, quiet work. Me, the cold, the snow, and silence. I'm Elijah. 2 months in, everything was fine, until it wasn't. It started with sounds barely there, like footsteps inside the walls. Wind, I thought. Mice, maybe. But the sounds were too regular. A rhythm, a pattern, a faint scrape, then a deliberate tapping, as if someone were sending a message. I hunted the source and found nothing. The sounds were everywhere. Then the marks appeared, scratches like fingerprints, but too long and thin to belong to a human. In the corridors, in the labs, a feeling took hold that something was here with me. Then Caleb vanished, my partner of 2 years. He was in the lab when I stepped out to check a gauge. When I came back, he was gone. His laptop opened to a blank screen. On the floor, a single fresh print long as a forearm. I called his name. Silence. Then a rustle, very close. I bolted to my room and turned the lock. The rustle grew. It sounded like nails dragging on glass, and it crept from behind the walls. The sounds weren't sounds. They were voices, whispers I couldn't understand in a language that wasn't human, cold and angry. Caleb wasn't missing. He'd been taken. And now, they were coming for me. I radioed for a helicopter, stormed in. No flight possible, trapped, alone. They waited. I heard them moving, heard the harsh breath. I knew they were waiting for me to open the door. I don't know how long I stayed locked in, hours, days. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. They knocked sometimes, each knock a second hard in my chest. They spoke to me and I couldn't understand. At last, the helicopter. I ran without looking back. As I sprinted for the skids, I glanced once and saw them seeping out of the walls. Human-shaped, but too long, too thin. Gray skin, eyes black as void. They didn't chase. They watched. And I knew they would remember me. I'll never go back. Sometimes I still hear them, whispers in the wiring, saying my name. They're waiting. I'm afraid I'll answer. Story 11. My grandfather, old Corwin, used to say there's nothing superfluous in the forest. Kill only for food. Never take more than you need. Follow the rules and the forest lets you live. I'm Caleb. I heard him. I didn't listen. Modern hunter. GPS. A good rifle. No superstitions. I came to Alaska's wild to prove I could survive. I was wrong. I shot a deer. A big one with branching antlers. Not for meat. For the rack. I left the carcass where it fell. I knew I'd broken every rule I knew he wouldn't have approved, and the world changed around me. The air grew heavy like water. The wind that combed the trees went still. No birdsong, only dead silence. Unnatural, eerie. Something watched me from between the trunks. I took my dog Shadow and made for camp. On the way, a deer's cry cut the hush, but stretched with pain like weeping. Then a wolf's howl, too close, too loud. There are no wolves here. Those sounds weren't sounds, they were a warning. Back at camp, a man stood behind my tent, tall, thin, face lost to shadow. Another hunter, I thought. He didn't move, he only watched. I called out, no answer, and then I understood. Not a man. A rustle in the brush told me I wasn't alone. I raised the rifle, no target to aim at. The voices closed in, voices of the animals I'd killed, begging for mercy. I broke. I climbed into the truck and drove, never looking back. I escaped. I wasn't safe. At home, the voices came with me, scratching along the walls, a whispering of my name, not just voices, them. Forest things, mimics that could borrow any sound. They didn't want to kill me, they wanted me to become one of them. Sometimes in the mirror I see him, the tall figure from the trees standing just behind my eyes, watching, waiting. I don't know when it happens. I know that it will. The forest always takes its due. I broke its rules, now I pay. Story 12. I'm Simon. I used to call myself a romantic. I left the city for Alaska to photograph the aurora borealis, my muse, my purpose, my life. I came to Mirror Lake, a remote bowl of water ringed with mountains, no one there but me in the silence. Locals called it cursed. I believed in beauty. That night the aurora was a cathedral, green and violet veils dancing doubled in the lake's black glass. The cold felt solid, it climbed into my bones. I set the tripod and pulled a run of long exposures. best shots of my life, I thought, until I saw them. In the heart of the aurora, faces, not chance patterns, faces, eyes empty and black. Thin, stretched silhouettes, hands reaching down toward the earth. Impossible. But there they were. I couldn't look away. They weren't part of the light. They were in it. Outside again, the light had changed, moving not at random but with a slow, sinister grace. It shaped itself into figures like the ones in my frames. They were trying to speak. The air vibrated. A low, dull hum I felt in my bones. A voice, not just light. Life, ancient, alien, watching me, knowing I had seen. One figure, woman-like, extended a hand. Human in outline, empty within, no face, only a blank white mask. Motionless, and yet I felt her gaze. Then the voices pressed into my head, not words, thoughts, cold as space, hungry. They showed me dead worlds, scoured skies, and they were there too in all of it. They were light. They weren't benevolent. Predators that fed on consciousness, and they wanted mine. I dropped the camera and ran. I don't know where. I ran until I fell, afraid, shaken, mostly terrified of what they could do to me. I went back to the city. I quit photography. I can't look at the sky. I can't sleep. They're waiting. I hear them in my head. I feel them testing the edges of my mind. They want me to join them. They won't stop until they feed. Something is changing inside me. The light that was my muse is a curse now. My consciousness thins. Something cold and empty moves in. When it arrives, I won't be myself. I'll be one of them. And then I'll wait for the next soul foolish enough to look up and see.